Evening all, boys and girls, mums and dads, grands and granddads, friends of Llan Harry Primary School. Welcome. I thought we'd have a little read this evening. I'm going to read a book by one of my favourite authors, Sir David Walliams, and the book I've chosen, The Beast of Buckingham Palace. Most interestingly I found was this map at the start, if you can see, set in London 2120. And in the middle of the London there is a statue of David Walliams himself. Can you see it? And we'll start reading now. Chapter 1 today. It's called Dark. It was noon and the sky was black. There had been darkness over the kingdom for half a century. For many years before, the people of Earth had not taken care of their home. They'd burned down all the forests, reduced every last tree to ash. They'd pumped the rivers, lakes and seas full of waste, killing all the fish. They'd dug deeper and deeper and deeper under the ground for oil until the planet was hollow to its core. Eventually, Earth began to take its revenge. The ice caps of the Arctic and the Antarctic melted. The floods were so mighty that whole countries were submerged forever. Violent earthquakes shook entire cities to the ground. All that was left were piles and piles of rubble. Volcanoes erupted, pumping billions of tons of ash into the air. Without the sunlight, the crops withered and died. Nothing could grow. The kingdom was plunged into an eternal winter. It was the only world Alfred knew. He was already 12 years old, but had never ever seen sunlight. Often he dreamed how it must have been to feel the sun on your face, or run through a field of tall grass, or swim in a sunlit sea. But it was just that, a dream. The boy had seen pictures of the sun in books and marvelled at it, a perfect circle of gold. Alfred would spend hours and hours imagining how the sky must have looked, with 1,000 little lights twinkling through the blackness at night. He was one of those children who liked nothing more than to be alone with his own imagination. In truth, he had little choice. Having been sick his whole life, soon after he was born he became ill. As a baby, Alfred had not just expected to have a normal life. He had not really been expected to survive. But that's just what he did. He survived. Just. The child was as pale as snow and as thin as dust. He wore thick glasses to aid his poor eyesight. Often Alfred was so weak he had to stay in bed all day. Thank goodness all around his bed were piles and piles and piles of books. Books, books and more books. Books about animals, books about space, books about trees, about dinosaurs. Books about books. Here's Alfred, a book lover. Books about history were his absolute favourite. The trouble was, there was a strict curfew in the building where Alfred lived. Night was the most dangerous time. That's when there was most chance of an attack from outside. Lights had to be out at 8 o'clock sharp, blackout, by order of the king. Anyone caught with lights on would be severely punished. Punishments were brutal in the kingdom. Those in power had returned to medieval forms of torture. The thumbscrew, the iron maiden, the breaking wheel, the pillory, the rack, the skull's bridle, the rat's dungeon, the head crusher, the iron chair. I'd like to have some of these in school. Despite the strict rules, the boy loved his books so much he would carry on reading by candlelight under his bed covers, an old trick. The night our story begins, though, Alfred was doing just that. He was reading a weighty leather-bound book about the kings and queens of Britain through the ages. The first one was Alfred the Great. He had become ruler an impossibly long time ago in 871. The boy was named after that first king, but it was hard to believe anybody would ever describe this Alfred as great. He felt anything but. As the boy was devouring the story of the beheading of King Charles I in 1649, a deafening sound rocked the room. Kaboom! Alfred dropped his book. Thud! and his candle. He nearly set the covers alight. Woof! Smothering the flames and blowing the candle out, whoosh! He pulled up his bed covers with a whip. A huge explosion outside had illuminated the boy's room, glowing red, orange, and yellow. Alfred slid out of the bed using all his strength, limped over to the huge bay window. Just those few steps left him painfully out of breath. He leaned out the window frame to steady himself. Alfred's bedroom was high upon the top floor. From here he could see far across London. A building was ablaze. Not just any building, St. Paul's Cathedral. This historic structure, perhaps one of the most famous in the world, had been destroyed. Its huge white dome was cracked, as if it were nothing more than an egg. Huge plumes of black smoke billowed high into the air. Oh no, thought Alfred. No, not St. Paul's. He had seen many London landmarks destroyed over the years. Nelson's column had been toppled to the ground. Crunch! The London Eye plunged into the River Taff. Splash! The Royal Albert Hall's roof had caved in after a bomb had blasted it to pieces. Boom! However, none of these was as sacred as St. Paul's. This was a new low. The cathedral had been built after the Great Fire of London in, that's right, 1666. The glorious structure had miraculously survived the Blitz, when Nazi bombs rained down on London during World War II, but now it was burning to the ground. Alfred's next thought was, revolutionaries. This had all the hallmarks of one of their attacks. The boy had never met anyone from this top-secret organisation, but the Lord Protector had taught him much about them. From what Alfred had been told, the revolutionaries hated the fact that power returned to the king. They wanted to overthrow him and behead him, just like the Roundheads had done to Charles I during the English Civil War. There's St. Paul's burning in the middle there. The revolutionaries stood only for death and destruction. That's why the Lord Protector said they needed to be crushed at all costs. Rat-a-tat-tat! That was the burst of machine gun fire. No! The distant shouts. Was that a scream? Alfred shivered. As much as he wanted to look away, he couldn't. Every day there were attacks all over London. But explosions on this scale were rare. The boy pressed his hand up against the cold, thick glass and looked out in devastation. This was the kingdom Alfred would one day inherit.